So yeah, I started avecnayo and I want to say January 2022, and essentially it was just the result of me wanting to release instrumental music. Now at that point, it had been instrumental releases of some songs I had from my earlier project, called Nayo Kenza, or from my disbanded band, The Ocean and I. However, it wasn't my first foray into instrumental music. The Ocean and I started as an instrumental project, and then I had also tried to release instrumental music in the beginning of the 2010s, but there was a part of me that eventually always wanted to create lyrics and perform vocals, and that won out. But I think around 2022, I was just kind of tired of performing vocals, and I lost my passion for writing lyrics. But at the same time, though, while I lost that passion for writing lyrics, I gained a passion for trying to express myself slowly via music and solely via instrumentals. So I guess it was like an exchange of passion, as it were, between an old interest and a new interest. Moondalia started in 2024, and Moondalia, I'm actually still in Moondalia. We're still doing Moondalia. However, my return to avecnayo was due to a loss I suffered last year. So I lost a parent, and as everyone knows, losing a parent is not fun. This is my second parent to lose. So while that in itself is very tough, I spent most of that period being supported by friends and family. Obviously, I have siblings, so we went through it together. And I wanted to kind of express everything I felt from that exact moment in a way that wasn't necessarily tied to Moondalia, because I wanted to kind of just, fully represent what I expressed. And at first, I was going to have lyrics on it. I thought maybe I'd start a new project or something, but then I decided that in the end, I didn't actually want to have lyrics. I wanted to work more on expressing everything I wanted to say through simple melodies and things of that nature. So I decided to resurrect the avecnayo project. And yeah, that's who I am. And I released Raspberry Sunrise, which is my first EP for that project in over 3 years. Yeah. So I think internally my creative process doesn't really differ that much, but I think externally, obviously working in a group with someone else and working by yourself, there are differences. Moondalia has a very much postal service approach to writing music, which obviously the postal service approach, which is, one person composes one part and sends to the other, and then they get their compositions back and they put it together. That is obviously the norm, as it would be, in this era. But yeah, so usually with Moondalia, either I'll write a part and then I'll send it to Luca for a bass line, or Luca might have a part that he might have an idea for, and then I'll compose around that. But with avecnayo, obviously it's all me. So if I have an idea, I can complete it from start to finish without having to, wait to get parts or run it past somebody else, which is, a blessing and curse. Because with Moondalia, I like the sense of there being collaboration. But with avecnayo, it's just me. So like if I have a bad idea, there's no one around to stop me and say, hey, maybe you should take a beat and rethink this. But yeah, I really like the creative process for both projects, and I think that I need to have a collaborative project. I also need to have a solo project where I can do whatever I want whenever I want. And I'm grateful for both of them, avecnayo and Moondalia. So my main goal for avecnayo is very similar to the goal that Luca and I have for Moondalia, which is that due to the nature of being instrumental music, I want to present it in a way that it can easily hook itself into the listener and hopefully color their lives and become a part of their memories. I know that sounds kind of hokey, so bear with me. Yeah, I was very lucky in Moondalia to find a partner who was okay with me having this insistence on everything being in a pop format. You know, intro, chorus, verse, bridge, outro, that type of deal. I find that with a lot of instrumental music that I enjoy, sometimes you might have pop structures and sometimes you just have a different structure where, there might be narratives in the form of different motifs and sounds. But for me, I like pop structure. That's my medium, that's my chosen art medium, as it were. And in avecnayo, I create pop structures with the intention, again, of hopefully having the song weasel its way into the hearts and minds of the listeners. So, with that being said, when I approach it from an atmospheric or emotional point of view, my own personal philosophy up until now, and probably henceforth, has been when I create the drums and the bass and the melody, I'm usually trying to I guess, attack three different parts of the body, or I guess of the psyche, as it were. So, the drums are for the shoulders. Those get your shoulders bouncing. That's where the bounce starts. That's where like the beat happens, as it were. Self-explanatory. I try to write bass for the hips and for the groin area. Like I want people to sway their hips. Even though my music tends to be a bit more melancholic, I still want people to sway their hips while they shed a tear. So yeah, the drums and all of the percussions are for the shoulders to get you to bounce. The bass is for the hips and the groin to get you to sway to the music. And then now, especially on the last EP, Raspberry Sunrise, I'm trying to compose the melodic parts to really attack your head and your heart at the same time. I want them to stick in your head, and then at the same time, though, I want them to really have an impact on your heart. Again, back to that idea of hopefully coloring the lives of my listeners and then becoming memories that they look back on. Because I do think that is one of the strongest advantages of instrumental music. There aren't lyrics to kind of direct you which way to feel, so you can attach your own emotions to these songs, which in turn can recall or be recalled as memories later on in the future. So yeah, I try to just attack the heart, mind, shoulders, and hips and groin area. And then I also try to hopefully leave a lasting impression with my music. And I think that's my philosophy for when I write for both Avecnayo and Mundalia. So, looking back across the 4 years that I've been doing the avecnayo project, I think there are two eras that particularly stick out to me, and ironically, they're both from this year. So, I think the writing of Raspberry Sunrise, I started that in January of this year, and again, intentionally, I thought that I was going to have lyrics in the beginning, but then after a couple of months of me just sitting on the instrumentals I had finished with space for lyrics, I realized that I didn't want to do vocals. I didn't want to write lyrics. So I went back and I wrote all the top lines where the melodies would have gone. For some of the songs, I wrote top lines to kind of guide my melody writing later on. But I went back and I rewrote all of that. And the emphasis was on not simple melodies, but catchy melodies. Going forward, I'm going to try to experiment a bit more with writing melodies that can be played with one hand, but I'll talk about that a bit later. But for the recording of Raspberry Sunrise, I wrote all the melodic parts myself. Some of my other releases, there's a good mixture of samples and sample chopping, as well as my own production and programming. And I mean, obviously, samples and sample chopping is a part of production and programming, but there was more mixed in with other parts I would write, such as I'd write certain bass lines, or I'd sample and rearrange certain bass lines, I'd write certain melodies, or I'd sample and rearrange certain melodic samples, things of that nature. But for Raspberry Sunrise, I wanted to write everything. I wanted to write all the melodic parts and all the bass lines. So that was a huge difference for me, and it felt good to do. I'm actually quite happy I did that, and I'm going to probably continue doing that henceforth. But I still want to incorporate some sample-based work as well, but we'll see how we go. And then the second era shift, as it were, was the process behind my latest EP, Camping Indoors Volume 1. Now, for this EP, it's mostly just a chill ambient remix of some songs from some of my previous EPs. I got a request to play a show, and the organizer asked me if I had any like chill ambient mixes. And I said, you know what, I can make them. And that's been fantastic to me because previously, I had always thought I would present avecnayo in a certain way live. I had this customized guitar-shaped sample machine instrument that, I would play. Now, I didn't think that would be appropriate for the ambient set, so I ended up coming up with another tabletop setup that allowed me to be expressive, but also to match the vibe and the atmosphere of that music. And from remixing my own songs and to creating a new live setup for those remixes, I realized that going forward, because I don't have a band, I also want to have a tabletop setting for regular avecnayo performances. So sonically, Raspberry Sunrise ushered in a new era for me personally, and then I guess performance-wise, Camping Indoors Volume 1 ushered in another era for me aesthetically. Oh, what can listeners expect? That's a great question. Well, as I kind of touched upon earlier in my last answer to the last question, henceforth, I'm going to be doing more of writing the melodies myself. And this is because there are a lot of things I want to try and I want to express. And specifically, I guess, henceforth, probably for the next EP that might come out either this year or next year, I haven't even started writing it yet. But one of my main ideas is to write really simple melodies, but make them catchy. But I want them to be something that anyone can play with this one hand. And I really want to experiment with that and just making the most simple, but yet catchy melodies again. And then I think for the live atmosphere, yeah, I had kind of let not avecnayo kind of be retired, but now that I'm bringing it back, I really want to emphasize the live aspect of this project. The name avecnayo, it means with Nayo in French. So my name is Nayo, avec, French for with. And that used to be my old DJ name. And the reason I was calling myself avecnayo was because my prior DJ crew was called Wood Off Dance Party. And both DJ crews, I guess, had this emphasis on the fact that, we were there with the audience to create an experience together. And for avecnayo now as an instrumental pop music project, I still want to create these experiences with the audiences that they're with me going on a journey together. So, as I mentioned before, I decided to right now base my performances around a tabletop setup. I don't have a band. In the future, when I have my ideal band, I will probably go back to the guitar shaped instrument because then I'll have a drummer, I'll have a bassist, and I'll probably have like a keyboardist or a DJ. So it makes sense visually and aesthetically. But right now, I think that with me being one person on stage, whether I'm doing an ambient set or a regular avecnayo set, I kind of want to invite the audience to kind of come into my workshop, as it were. And I want them to see me tinker and play back my music in a way that's easy for them to read and understand so that they don't have to think about what is he doing, but instead they can focus on dancing and coming along with me on an emotional journey. So yeah, kind of a long answer, I'm sorry. But I guess the listeners can expect that I'm going to make catchier songs, probably super melancholy, but yet catchy at the same time. I can't escape that. And then, yeah, live shows that will hopefully be a bit more of an experience as opposed to just simply watching somebody push buttons, quote unquote, on stage. All right. Thank you for your time.